Hey there, I'm Ari from the Tech Buyers Guru, and in this video, I'll be rounding up some of the most popular Kaze fans on the market to show you which are truly the best of the best. Now, this is actually a follow-up to a popular video I recently published looking at cooler fan performance, and in that roundup, Arctic and Noctua were victorious. Well, they are back again to defend their crown against Be Quiet, SilverStone, and Scythe. Now, the case that I'll be using is the PureBase 500DX from Be Quiet, a new offering at the $100 price point that I recently reviewed and found to be fantastic, in part because it has great airflow, which is an important characteristic when testing Kaze fans. It also has a vented front panel, which allows me to do audio testing easily and allows you to listen in. So I will be providing audio clips of each of these fans in action. Now, in terms of the test setup, I have a Ryzen 5 3600X cooled by a Scythe Fuma 2 cooler. Now, that's a fantastic CPU cooler, but I don't think that should deter you too much. Now, you may be thinking, shouldn't I have used a really bad CPU cooler so I could really stress the Kaze fans? Well, I really think of those as two separate equations, and I'm not too worried about the fact that I'm using a good CPU cooler because I'm going to give you a lot of other data points throughout the system to show you the temps that go beyond just what the CPU cooler is doing, and that includes GPU temps. I'll be using the RTX 2080 Ti GPU, an extremely hot GPU, and an open air model from EVGA, so it's going to be filling the case with hot air, and that goes beyond what a CPU cooler can do. So really, the Kaze fan performance is going to be paramount in this test. In all, I tested 10 fans for this roundup, starting with the Arctic P12 PWM, a $9 1800 RPM fan that was a price performance leader in my radiator test. Next up, we have the Arctic F12 PWM, which again is $9 but hits only 1350 RPM. Then we have the gamified version of the F12. It's the F120 BioniX. It's $17 and hits a much higher 1800 RPM. Next up, we have the Be Quiet Silent Wings 3. My non-retail version comes off the Dark Rock Pro 4 and spins at 1500 RPM. Be Quiet had none of the retail versions available for testing. The only difference is that they spin at 1450 instead of 1500, but are otherwise identical. Next up, we have the Noctua NF-A12x25 Redux. It's a $14 fan that hits 1700 RPM. Next up, we have the Noctua NF-A12x25, truly a favorite to win this roundup after winning my radiator contest. It is a $30 2000 RPM fan. Then we have the Blacknoise NB E-Loop 120. This was a special request by many of my viewers. It was a new fan to me, but it certainly has the looks of a sports car. We'll see how it works out in this test. It's a $30 1500 RPM fan. Then we have the Scythe Kaze Flex. It's a 1200 RPM fan that comes in at $14. Then we have SilverStone's new Air Penetrator 120i-Pro. It's a $24 fan that comes in at 2000 RPM. And finally, we have SilverStone's AB120R ARGB. It's a $20 fan that hits 2200 RPM and includes ARGB effects. And here's our test platform. It's a Be Quiet PureBase 500DX case with a Ryzen 5 3600X CPU, a Scythe Fuma 2 cooler, and an EVGA RTX 2080 Ti GPU. Special thanks to Blacknoise, which sent these noise blocker fans to me halfway through my testing, express from Germany. This is an exquisite fan with serrated teeth and a foil design to its fan blades, unlike any other fan on the market. It also has integrated rubber pads and 2 different lengths of modular cabling for your PWM controls. Now I'm going to quickly address my test methodology. I'll be presenting both decibel normalized tests at 30 decibels, which is essentially an idle level, and then RPM normalized tests that were based on this Scythe Kaze Flex sample, which I previously tested and found could run at 1300 RPM. Unfortunately, in this new test running on a different motherboard, it only hit its rated 1200 RPM, and I tested it last, which means it's the only fan in this roundup that couldn't hit the target 1300 RPM, despite the fact that I designed the entire test around it. So that's just a reminder that sometimes things don't go quite the way you planned. For the idle test, I do have a decibel normalized set of benchmarks. The test fan is installed in the front of the case, locked at 30 decibels if it can achieve it. The Scythe Fuma 2 is locked at 600 RPM, and the GPU is locked at 0 RPM. For the first load test, I keep my test fan locked at 30 decibels, which again is quite low. Then I turn up the fans on my RTX 2080 Ti and boot up 3D Mark Firestrike Combined, which is a true load of both the GPU and CPU. finally, we have the RPM normalized test. Again, 3D Mark Firestrike combined, but this time the test fan is running at 1300 RPM, giving the system a fighting chance to survive. I do have a fourth test for you, but I will be keeping the parameters of that one a surprise until the very end. All right, let's get into the benchmark. Starting with idle at the desktop, we have the fixed 30 decibel sound level at 4 inches. And here we have a number of fans that are basically performing fairly similarly. There's not a lot of heat in the system. One fan I do need to call out is the SilverStone AP120i-Pro. It actually couldn't hit 30 decibels because I couldn't get the RPM below 1000 RPM in the ASUS motherboard software I was using, and it also has the worst thermals despite having the highest noise level. This is an air channeling fan. SilverStone calls it an air penetrator. And I'm going to talk about that a little bit more a little later on in this roundup. It's not a great fan for this test when used just alone in a large case. So it really doesn't work well here, and we'll see this again and again in our results. But at idle, in terms of these fans, overall the Arctic P12 is actually my favorite. It has the lowest average temp, but you know what? Idle's not a way to judge a fan. Let's move on to load benchmarks. Looking at 3D Mark Firestrike combined, which loads up the CPU and GPU simultaneously to truly fill the case with heat, we have a different set of winners here, and actually it's fairly surprising. Now keep in mind, this is still at 30 decibels. That's very, very quiet. By far the loudest noise coming from my system during these tests was the GPU, which I locked at 40% or 1400 RPM. So at this point, that's really all you'd be hearing. And of the various fans here in the roundup, the winners in this test are the F12 from Arctic, the Be Quiet Silent Wings 3, the AB120R, surprisingly, from SilverStone, the ARGB fan, and then the Kaze Flex. And I want you to keep an eye on that Kaze Flex. This thing is, no pun intended, going to flex its muscles in a minute. But before that, I'm going to actually give you some audio samples of each of these fans at this 30 decibel level. Here's the Arctic F12 PWM running at 30 decibel idle. This is the Arctic F120 BioniX at 30 decibel idle. This fan clearly creates more turbulence. Here's the Arctic P12 PWM running at 30 decibels, which comes to around 1000 RPM on this fan. This is the Be Quiet Silent Wings 3 at idle. This is the Noctua NF-A12x25 at idle, 30 decibels. Here is the Noctua NF-P12 Redux at idle. This is the Noise Blocker E-Loop at idle. This is the Scythe Kaze Flex at 30 decibels. This is the SilverStone AP120i-Pro at idle. Here's the SilverStone AB120 Air Blazer fan at idle. You also see that it does have ARGB effects. All right, we've covered a lot of ground already, and perhaps you're coming to some decisions, but hold your horses. There's a lot more to learn. Let's take a look at these fans at a fixed 1300 RPM. Now there's a lot of data here, and I'm going to encourage the benchmark jockeys out there not to focus on the GPU temps, as tempting as it may be, because the GPU was actually hitting throttling temperatures in almost all of these tests because I had the fans down so low. That means that these are really being affected by the delta from ambient conversion that I made. All right. So basically in all these tests, the GPU is at 88 degrees Celsius. So let's ignore that. Let's look at the others, particularly the ones in red and green. That's the chipset and the VRM. These are things that nothing else in your case is cooling other than your case fan. And frankly, there are some huge, huge winners here. Let's take a look at the Scythe Kaze Flex. Amazing performance here. At 40 decibels, a little bit louder than average, but really good performance. Also the SilverStone AB120R. Fantastic performance from this ARGB fan. 41 decibels, again a little bit loud. With that said, these were two of the three fans that could actually prevent throttling in my GPU. The other one being the F12 BioniX. They all hit around 85 degrees Celsius on the GPU, but the BioniX wasn't as good in the other temperature benchmarks. So I really like the Kaze Flex and AB120R here. Now I want to return to an issue I raised earlier regarding Silverstone's Air Penetrator 120i fan. This is an air channeling fan that is highly directional in nature, and we see the results here where it has the best CPU temps and the worst chipset temperature. The air coming from this fan is coming in a straight line. To a lesser extent, I think this also affects the Blacknoise noise blocker E-loop fan, both being essentially air channeling fans, and you have to use these right. You have to put them in the right applications. These are best used paired with additional fans of the same type in the front of a chassis, blanketing an entire system with air. If you use a single one of these fans on its own in a large system, it will underperform. Now, if you wanted the best balance of noise and temperatures here, you'd find it in the Arctic P12 PWM and the Noctua NF-A12x25. That Noctua fan's just 32 decibels at 1300 RPM. This is truly an amazing fan when it comes to low noise levels at high RPMs. Speaking of noise levels, let's get to some more audio tests here. And here's the Arctic F12 PWM running in the Firestrike stress test. Here's the F12 BioniX, again producing a ton of turbulence. Here's the Arctic P12 PWM at 1300 RPM running 3 mark. Here's the Be Quiet Silent Wings 3 under 3D mark. This is the Noctua NF-A12x25 at load in 3D mark Firestrike. Here is the Noctua NF-P12 Redux at 1300 RPM in 3D mark Firestrike. Here's the noise blocker E-loop in 3D mark Firestrike. This is the Scythe Kaze Flex at full speed, 1200 RPM in 3D mark Firestrike. Here's the SilverStone AP120i-Pro during 3D mark Firestrike combined. And here's the SilverStone AB120R in 3D mark. Now here's a surprise I saved for last. I knew that some of you would come back and tell me you didn't care about noise levels, that all you cared about was maximum performance. Well, prepare to have your mind absolutely blown. I took 5 of the top performing fans in this test and ran them at their maximum RPM, which ranged from 1200 RPM with the Scythe Kaze Flex to 2000 RPM for the Noctua NF-A12x25. Take a look at the results here. Folks, if you had preconceived notions about which fans would perform the best in this test, you've better throw them all away at this point. The Scythe Kaze Flex is the quietest and highest performing fan in this test. It is simply in a class by itself. And this shouldn't surprise people who've been around this industry for a long time. Scythe is an expert fan maker. They make some of the best air coolers, and they clearly make some of the best fans. And if you thought that 1200 RPM just wasn't strong enough, well, you've definitely learned your lesson, and so did I. I thought that this fan would not be able to compete, but it's not any regular average 1200 RPM fan. This thing moves some air and moves it effectively. Now the Arctic F12 BioniX actually achieves the same results on average, but it's coming in at a deafening 57 decibels. And if you don't think that is relevant to you, let's have a listen. reminder, each of those 3 fans offers equivalent performance in this test. All right, well, that was a bit of a shocker, wasn't it? I know a lot of you expected a different fan to win, specifically the Noctua NF-A12x25. In a poll I put up before publishing this video, fully 59% of you chose that fan to win this roundup. And I don't really blame you because it was so dominant in my Radiator fan roundup. It won that contest and I fully expected it to do very well in this contest as well. And while it was fine, it simply didn't prove its worth. It's not a jack of all trades fan. Certainly not the way that Noctua markets it. Frankly, I think it's a Radiator fan that it's attempting to push as a Kaze fan because more people buy Kaze fans than Radiator fans. But if you're in the market for a Kaze fan, I've got better recommendations for you. First, the Scythe Kaze Flex at $14. This is a fantastic fan, and it should come as no surprise that Scythe, which has been around for decades, knows how to make Kaze fans. Frankly, that's basically their only business other than coolers. They really do it right. The only problem is you can't find it in stock right now. So that does mean, yes, I'm recommending a fan you can't buy. Unfortunately, Scythe has been hit really hard by circumstances around the world right now. A lot of their most popular products, including the Scythe Fuma 2 cooler, which I named the best cooler ever, cannot be purchased today. And that is true of this fan as well. But I know they will restock, Scythe will bounce back, and they'll be able to supply you this great Kaze fan in the future. In the meantime, another fan took an award in this contest, and I was really surprised at this. It is the Airblazer 120 from SilverStone, the same fan that comes on the PF120 cooler that I have here. This is a great all-around fan. In a previous review, I found that it did wonders on the PF120. It actually performed just as well as the Arctic P12, which won my Price Performance Award for Radiator fans. And yet it also works really well as a Kaze fan, better, I believe, than any of Arctic's products. Now, at $20, it's a little bit expensive and it's a little bit loud, but you do get ARGB effects and it also has a very wide range. So if you need that additional boost, and you need more airflow, and frankly, for some reason you don't care about noise, it will go up to 2200 RPM, which is the highest level of any of the fans in this roundup. So I gotta commend SilverStone for this fan. It really is a great all-around fan. And if you want those ARGB effects, it's an automatic buy. Of course, none of the other fans that I have here work as well, and I doubt you'll find a better ARGB fan on the market today. Now, a runner-up here is actually the fan I just mentioned, the Arctic P12. Now, Arctic didn't even submit this fan for this test. This was what they sent me for my Radiator fan roundup. What they wanted me to test was their F12 and F120 for this test, and I did go about doing that. I expected them to perform really well, but I actually like the P12 more, and I'll tell you why. It's a really good fan at low RPMs. So what you can do with this fan is you can load up your case with a number of these fans, run them below 1000 RPM, and you'll get a great wall of air at extremely low noise levels. So I really like this fan, and the other advantage is you can get it as a 5-pack for like $27. I mean, there were a number of fans in this test that cost $27 for one. You can get 5 of these. So if you want a deal and you're willing to load up your case with a number of low RPM fans, the Arctic P12 does get the nod. Now I'm going to hand out a couple of Razzies here. There were a couple of fans that I have to urge you not to buy. And one of them actually does come from Arctic. It's the F120 BioniX. Now this is a gamified version of their F12, and what they've done is given it this rubberized frame, which has 2 huge drawbacks. First of all, as I showed you in my audio test, it produces a ton of turbulence, far more than the F12. And second of all, it's flexible. That's not good, guys. So in certain circumstances, you'll actually get fan rub when the blades hit the frame because it's been distorted in your installation. So you have to be really careful the way you install these because you can actually distort them. It's also almost twice the price of an F12 or P12, and all you're getting is the fancy colors. If you need that, just step up to an ARGB fan. Frankly, that's going to give you a lot more style. This is not a good fan. Don't buy it. The other fan that was a huge letdown was the Noctua NF-P12 Redux. This is something Noctua specifically recommended that I test for this review. I want to make that clear. I asked if I should use their S12 line. They said, no, test this because it's very popular. Well, here's my message to you all. It's very popular because it's a Noctua at a low price. It is not a good fan. This is a bad fan. at $14. Don't buy it. And I know I'm going to hear from you guys telling me that I don't know what I'm talking about. Noctua is the best, etc., etc. This is a bad fan. It's outdated, and frankly, it should not be purchased. Do not spend $14 on this thinking that because it's Noctua, it's better than all the other $10 or $12 or $14 fans on the market. It was both the loudest and lowest performing fan in my roundup. I think that speaks for itself. I know you guys are going to rage at me. I can take it. I've been there, all right? So Noctua does not win this contest. Scythe comes through victorious. A surprising win from SilverStone, and an honorable mention from Arctic for the P12 that has already won awards for me. Now, looking forward, I actually intended to do a 140 millimeter case fan roundup, and I literally have the fans stacked up next to me, ready to go. All 6 of the manufacturers that participated in this roundup sent me the 140 millimeter versions of their case fans. I'd like to hear from you. Do you want to see me review those fans in a similar setup as to how I reviewed the 120 millimeter fans? Or do you want to see something different? Maybe an exploration of case fan placement to optimize cooling. I did this for an ITX build. I could do this for an ATX build. For instance, if you took 2 of these fans or 2 of these fans, do you want both in the front? One in the front, one on top, top and rear, front and rear. There's so many combinations and permutations, and not a lot of people out there have tested these. I'd be happy to do that. I'm excited about that topic. I want to hear from you. I've got a lot of interest in this, but I have a limited amount of time, so I want to give you videos that respond to your needs, your questions, your concerns. So definitely put those down in the comments below. Ask me any questions you got about the fans I tested. I'm happy to respond. Try to keep your rage to a minimum because I did my best here. I talked with all these manufacturers in advance. I think I've done a pretty good job, but I'm always open to criticism and suggestions for future tests. As always, I do appreciate a like and subscribe. I did put a lot of time into this, and I will catch you next time.